Good morning. Good morning. Great to be in your company another Wednesday. It is June 9th, and I am literally in the middle of town today. Well, so it would seem. That's the beauty of the virtual world, but great to be in your company. And today we are going to spend some time focusing on a topic that specifically relates to men. This month of June, of course, you know, Father's Day is coming up on the 20th. And I have always heard the conversations where the guys say, oh, Mother's Day is a big hullabaloo, but nothing happens for the men. There's no focus on the men. So I decided that during the course of this month, we were going to speak on topics that, you know, connect with the men. So I look forward to the range of discourse that we will have. Today in particular, we are dealing with paternity leave. I think it's important. I think it is necessary. And kudos to those who have already put things in place at their specific companies. We will talk some more about that. But, you know, paternity leave, if we look simply at duration, means different things in different parts of the world and perhaps in different organizations, even if we're only looking at it in a localized sense. The thing is that there is nothing statutory about it. There is no legislation that governs that in Barbados. So we're going to look at that. We know that there have been conversations about moving in that direction. We're going to look at that. We're going to talk about, you know, making it happen with all things considered. So I'm looking forward to having that conversation. I just want to say to you, though, whether you're watching from right here at home on any of the social media, or you're watching the traditional sense on CBC TV 8, happy to have you in company. Happy to have you in company. If you're watching from even farther afield, staying connected, you know, or just because you found our shows and you love what we're doing, you love the information, you love the entertainment, we're happy to have you watching. So just stay tuned, and remember that your questions or your comments, they are welcome via Facebook. You can send your comments there if you have questions or there's something you would like to share with us as it relates to today's topic, which is paternity leave. Just in case you missed that a few seconds ago, feel free to do so. You can also engage by calling us here. So looking forward to that. Now, before we get back to the topic, there it is on screen. So take note of how you can send your questions or comments. But this month, the month of June, also focuses on the environment. And yesterday was actually World Oceans Day. So during the course of the month, there is a little extra being paid to extra attention being paid to what's happening with our environment. You know, that thing, that space that we use, that we need, that we often take for granted, that we abuse sometimes, that we take from, but often don't think of giving. Well, here's a little something that always bothers me as it relates to the environment, and I just want you to be aware. We have lots of beaches, and if you know anything about me at all, you know that I love a beach. I love a little beach time. It makes me happy, makes me feel absolutely contented, makes me feel hopeful about what is to come the next day. You know, having the opportunity to sit and watch a sunset by one of our awesome beaches here in Barbados, that's a special thing. It's not something you should take for granted, but it is something you should do. I like to say, take advantage of watching as many of those sunsets, our sunsets, before that final sunset comes. Think about it. Just for a moment. But one of the things that gets to me is, you know, when people go to the beach and, you know, they take their picnic baskets and they take all their drinks and then they drop the cups and bottles on the sand. You know, when that ends up in the water, we have problems. The problem of pollution, and I'm sure you've heard about the story, the movie of the plastic ocean. I'm sure you know about that. I'm sure you know how these plastics can get into the fish, get into the ecosystem, and somehow end back up with us. Sometimes, I'm sure, we don't know why we may have some of the health problems that we may have. But what I do know is that we all need to do our part to at least keep our infants clean, and it is our responsibility. If you go to the beach to relax, have a good time, get your sea bath, just hang out with family or with your tight circle of friends, whatever you take there, and this is something that can litter the space, make sure you take it up. I know people probably look at me like I'm crazy sometimes, but if I walk and I see like a whole PET bottle just there on the sand, I'm going to pick it up. I would like to see more bins in the beach area. I don't know how we could erect them, but in the absence of that, just remember to take the garbage with you. You can always bring something, put it in it, and then when you get to a bin, dispose of it. So I will tend to pick them up, and if I find a bin, or at least move it away from the area where it can get into the water. But try and do your part to keep our beaches and our environment safe. Kudos to those of you who've been working around the streets and trying to clear and clean those gutters. Yes, the work goes on. I appreciate it. I don't know if everybody does, but I appreciate it. And I'm hoping that as we continue to do that, we can also work out a better plan so that once it's cleared, it's immediately picked up and not left there for too long for people to drive over and spread out or have to shun and then possibly go into the way of another vehicle. But these are little things that we can work towards. Yes, with that said, I told you the topic. We're focusing on paternity leave, and my guests this morning, looking forward to chatting with them. We're going to hear from the gentleman, but there's one lady joining the conversation because she is a human resources specialist and she is well aware, and I think that this area is particularly dear to her heart as well. So Brittany Brathwaite, she is going to be here. She is a human resources specialist, as I mentioned. We will talk with her about the legislation and getting this set up and how easy it is to put it in place at an organization, whatever the size, whatever the type. We're also going to take the opportunity to hear from Mr. Fabian Sargent. He is the president of the Men's Empowerment Network. If you've not heard of the organization, you're going to today, and you're going to find out about the causes that this organization is championing on behalf of men. And yes, guys, possibly how you can become a part of that. And I want to hear everybody's perspective on paternity leave. Anderson Langdon is not left out of this conversation. He is the executive director of the Barbados Family Planning Association. He is actually one of the founding members of the Men's Empowerment Network, and he's here with us. We're going to hear his perspective. He has had a lot to say about paternity leave and making it part of what we do as a society, whether it's legislation or not. So we're going to talk with them. I'm looking forward to the conversation. I want to remind you that usually my 10 to 12 is what it is, my 10 to 12, and we go from 10 a.m. right through to 12. But today, I'm sure you are aware by now, there is a press conference scheduled for 11:30 this morning. And everybody wants to know what's happening with the 11 plus. So we will be on standby for the wrap up. If that should come around 11:30, you'll understand this is why we will be wrapping today's show a little earlier than usual. So with all that said, we're going to take a quick break and then we'll get the conversation moving right here for the Wednesday, June 9th edition of My 10 to 12. We're back with you now and getting into the conversation. So I want to remind you as well, you can send your questions or comments. You can post them on Facebook. The topic is paternity leave, a right. It is really a right as well. So that's what we're looking at. We want to make dads feel a part of the process. Certainly we want to encourage the level of responsibility from both parents from the very beginning. But if we go back to February 26, 2020 story published in our local media as it relates to paternity leave, it was said that Barbadian fathers will soon be getting paid leave from their jobs to help take care of their newborn babies. And that revelation would have been made from Minister of Labor and Social Partnership Relations, Colin Jordan, as the House of Assembly went into its second day of debate on the 2020-2021 estimates of revenue and expenditure. He said the leave would be granted under an arrangement similar to what currently obtains for women. The paternity leave will be statutory, like maternity leave. It is the proposal that it will be paid leave as well. The proposal further is that it will be taken around the time of birth, no later than a few months after birth. That was part of the explanation. And there was also concern at that time about abuse. But we know that with anything there is room for that. But if we put things in place to mitigate against that, I think that we can get there. So with that said, perhaps there are concerns that we may be moving a little slowly, but we all know what has also been in the forefront over the last year and some, the COVID-19 pandemic. But this is a situation that's going to be here because babies continue to come into the world, and it takes two to make it happen. So today we're going to start, though, the conversation by chatting with a gentleman who is part of an empowerment organization. His name is Fabian Sargent. He is the president of the Men's Empowerment Network. Good morning to you, Mr. Sargent, and it is great to have you joining us today on my 10 to 12.
Good morning, Cassandra. Thank you for having me this morning. It is also a pleasure when we're discussing and celebrating the efforts of men. So it's a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. I believe in fairness. And that's what these conversations during the month of June dedicated to matters that relate to men will be focused on. We're going to get to relationships too, but that's a whole other kind of relationship. Today we are focusing on the paternal responsibility. So first of all, let's talk a little bit about your organization, the Men's Empowerment Network. Just give us a little background so that persons understand what it is about, its mandate, and so on.
Okay, so the Men Empowerment Network support, we call it MENS. The acronym is MENS. It is an organization that focuses on the emotional and the psychological empowerment of men. We have a number of programs focusing on allowing men to express themselves in a holistic way and providing that safe space where they can interact with other men and get the positive feedback that is necessary. We also facilitate, if there's any counseling that is needed, we facilitate that as well. So all in all, we are here to empower men emotionally and get men in a better position to deal with themselves as individuals.
And have you been getting good interest and good feedback as it relates to the group from men?
We've been getting overwhelming support from men. To the extent that I do believe we need to have a lot more of these organizations in Barbados. I'm not one who thinks that one organization can do it all, or we're not territorial in any way. You know, we just had our last men's talk, which is a forum, the same forum that I mentioned to you, where men come out and they share, and we look at the effects of childhood on manhood. And we had just under 30 men attending. We've had these sessions running. I mean, they were affected by COVID, but prior to COVID, we've had these sessions running for like 9 months, every 2 weeks, with a consistent attendance of at least 25 men. So that in itself is phenomenal, and it shows you that men are responding, and they definitely welcome such an environment.
Okay. Now, I asked that because, you know, people always say, or there is no interest, or when men complain that when it comes to the women or the mothers, there is all this attention given. So when I hear about organizations like this that will give you an opportunity to voice your concerns and maybe have someone reach out on your behalf as a network, I feel still, though this is good, the 25 to 30 men, I feel like there should be more. I feel like there should be a bigger number. What are the ways that you are reaching out and letting men know that you're here?
So we're using social media in a major way. We're here. I mean, sometimes we have some interviews on television and so forth. We do, I mean, all forms of media. And we are now reaching out to schools because we have something called a young men's program where we are having these mentorship discussions with youngsters within secondary schools and within, at this point, with the Barbados Youth Advanced Score as well. So we're trying all the different avenues to reach out there to men, but it boils down to manpower. So we still don't want to bite off more than we can chew. Hence the reason why I am advocating for more groups to evolve to help the other men. We have probably near 150,000 men in Barbados. 100 men for an organization to deal with it's a lot. Okay, so that shows you the extent to where we need to go at a national level in terms of engaging men. And as I said, the men are engaging and they're getting the support of the females in their lives to really get involved in terms of dealing with themselves.
Fantastic. All right. So what is your position, or should I say your organization's position on paternity leave? I want to know what the feedback is from the men that you have been connecting with and reaching out with through the group, through the organization.
Well, this discussion is long overdue. It has started a little while ago, probably just before the Men Empowerment Network Support Organization started, and it was a part of a number of these discussions. But paternity leave is a right. I mean, it is not a privilege.
Correct.
It should be seen right as a right. A father has a right to spend that quality time to lay that foundation, that emotional and psychological and even that cognitive foundation with their child or children, and that should be done alongside or together with the mother, and shouldn't be seen as a mother and then the father separate. It should be parents coexisting and working together. So fatherhood definitely should be embraced. And even the perceptions that society have of fatherhood, I think that is where the challenge usually comes. Perceptions of fatherhood. But we definitely embrace paternity leave, long overdue, and I would like them to fast track the entire process so that it can become a full reality.
Well, let's talk about that perception of fatherhood that exists in our society, because if we don't deal with that, I think that is a major part of the problem that permeates a number of other areas that tend to make it difficult as well for dads who may be willing. So as far as you are concerned, what is that perception that's out there?
Well, I think based on experience, so let me speak on experience first. And there are some people who believe that a father has his place. So his place is certain areas. So I remember, like for my wife, when she was in labor with our first son, the midwife at the time didn't thought I had a place in the room to see my child come into this world. And my wife had to keep some noise, for lack of a better word, to get me into the room. So that is a typical example in terms of where some people think that men have a place or don't have a place. In schooling, some people believe that a father, I mean, when you say a father doing homework, I've heard of men complaining that they're doing online school and the teacher in the background saying, tell your mommy when it was the dad that is there facilitated the entire process.
Look at that. And you don't think that they're taking note of these little comments, huh?
Yes. I mean, these very small things, I mean, we can get real detail into all the cultural elements. But when we look at the day-to-day experiences, even something as simple as seeing dads in the doctor's offices, I'm seeing a lot more of that. I'm seeing
Good.
a lot more fathers attending doctor's appointments. I'm seeing a lot more fathers. I remember there was an activity I went to with my son. It was a sports or something. And I was surprised to see that most of the parents were dads. I mean, people may not take note of that, but I certainly zoomed in on it to see that fathers definitely are there. And people think, okay, the mothers are the ones who are supposed to run about behind the children. The mothers are the ones who are supposed to be up at night. The mothers are the ones that as soon as the child gets sick, the first point of contact. But fathers play a critical role in that. And even as newborns, that whole sense of touch,
Oh,
that
yes.
touch feeling, they think that is only limited to mothers. Yes, well, that is important. That first connection with the breast and so forth. It is also important, and is also important that men play their role in terms of creating that initial touch. I mean, creating that energy and that whole relationship with the newborn. So all of these are different aspects where men should be involved.
I absolutely agree. I am with you 100%. Let's just make that very clear, because I believe if you're there at inception, you should be there through the entire process and
Correct.
for all the milestones. That is how it should be. And I absolutely believe we have to give kudos to the dads that are doing that, and to the ones that are a little wayward, more encouragement and more advice and more look at the results you could get if you try it this way needs to be happening. But we're going to talk a little more. I'm just going to take a quick break and we'll be back with our topic today: paternity leave, a right to, right here on my 10 to 12. So I'm continuing the conversation with Fabian Sargent. He is president of the Men's Empowerment Network Support. Got to add that bit on because the support is absolutely critical. And before we took the break, we were talking about encouraging men to continue to do the good things that they are doing as far as their parental role is concerned, and to also try and reach out to those who are a little wayward. And as far as paternity leave goes, now, what is the ideal for you? What is some of the feedback that the men who've been gathering every 2 weeks with the support group, what are they saying? What do they want? Because as it stands for us in Barbados, it is legislated for women to receive 12 weeks. We usually, between the family and the doctor, you determine whether that's all coming at the end once the baby has been born, or if you're taking part before and part after. We know that the process for different women can be different and complicated or not, but that's what's there as far as women having maternity leave without fear of loss of their job, and knowing that they have at least some time to connect with the baby and get the baby all settled into its new environment as well. Ideally, what is wanted for men as far as paternity leave is concerned?
Well, in the name of gender equality, I do believe that what is good for the mother is also good for the father. And if the mother is given that 12 weeks, I do think the ideal situation would be to offer the father a similar 12 weeks. So that is an ideal situation. That is a time where even the couples, they get to understand themselves. They work together as a team. Okay, I mean, it is all about relationship building and to take a lot of the pressure off of any one person. So I would say that we would advocate for the similar 12 weeks that women are getting.
Okay, and that's the ideal situation, as you said.
I do, I do,
And
I do
yeah,
situation. Yes.
so if that is not the case. And I only say that because sometimes we have to take baby steps. That pun
Yeah.
wasn't intended. I mean, but, you know, sometimes it's like that. Some people, some organizations have offered a few days. Some have offered 2 weeks. What are your thoughts? What would your middle ground or be?
So I wouldn't work with a middle ground. What I'll say is that whatever is offered, as we start the process, we would accept. You know, I mean, we wouldn't want persons to be unreasonable. There are women who go through trauma. I mean, after childbirth is a very, very difficult healing process for women. It is not only about the man himself, but it is about the father being involved in that entire equation. So this is not only
Right.
about men or about the particular father. He that father's ability to have paternity leave is to benefit the child, not only in the short term, but in the long term, is also to benefit the mother because she too will be under tremendous pressure. Her body is healing. Some women are under some pain because of cuts and so forth. Having to get some rest at night, and
Mm-hmm.
all of the other things, and that if we are speaking about a family with more than one child, then you still have to look at the other children, whether it be to get them to school and all of that. So the responsibility is great, and you know you need to really share that responsibility. So it's not only about the men. So whatever time that they offer to us, we definitely would accept. But I would
Mm-hmm.
like that to be treated with reason, and at least look at what is offered for women as the benchmark as they do
Okay.
their planning.
That sounds fair. That sounds fair. Lots of good points coming through there. Are you getting direct feedback from some of the members accessing support group on this?
Recently, because I mean we've only just resumed our face-to-face meetings,
Mm-hmm.
so we would have been doing Zoom meetings. So there has not been a lot of feedback in relation to paternity leave, particularly. But I do know actually that once the discussion is open up, these issues definitely would come to the fore, where
Mm-hmm.
men would have a lot more to say on them.
Okay, well, as you mentioned that has come up, I'm hearing that there are other
Yes.
things as well that are critical. And I am interested in hearing about some of the other things that are challenging our men. What can you share?
Well, I can tell you access to children even at birth. So you
I
would have
knew it
had
was coming.
relationships.
Mm-hmm. Go
So
ahead.
so there are relationships that don't see the full length of a pregnancy. You know, things happen, life happens,
Yeah.
and individuals break up in the middle of a pregnancy before that child is born, and then there's some form of resentment. There's a lot of negative tension and energy, and then there becomes a fight for the father to to have access or even see that child. And based on experience and what I'm seeing, that is even more so with girl children, you know. So
Less
that is what makes
access?
less, yes, less access, you know. Where people are apprehensive about fathers caring for their girl children. As I said, even in situations where relationships were broken down, is a difficult situation, even with a father bathing that baby, or spending quality time. And people question that. There's some in society who are totally against that, or even fathers raising girl children, even though you would have had a lot of successful parenting happening where men would have raised, even as single parents, their girl children. And that is a very taboo area. It is an area that people don't really want to talk about, but men are getting tremendous pressure where access is concerned in those relationships that let's say that make sour.
Yeah, I'm loving the comments here. Some good feedback because I know that there are men who may not be doing what they're supposed to be doing, as there are women who are mothers who are not doing what they ought to be doing. But there are some men, and we're focusing on paternity leave today, so the access and all of that is coming up. There are men who are doing a fantastic job, and that's why I will always say I tip my hat to you. So as you were talking and about the paternity leave and, you know, having both parents there, you just alluded to a point that I wanted to make, which was the fact that sometimes the dynamics change. Sometimes people become pregnant, a woman will become pregnant, and things may break up before she even realizes. And that is an unfortunate situation. But if as adults we make decisions that we're going ahead and we are going to try to give the child the best possible life, we have to find a way for parents to coexist, even though they may have to do it in different spaces. And I don't know how paternity leave will be addressed as it relates to legislation when, for example, there could be foster care situations, there could be adoption situations. If you're going to be a good parent, as you're saying, the men need to have that opportunity to be there. You can't look at it because there's a girl, for example, you have a daughter. Both parents help to create this child. You can't look at the situation and say, oh, it's a man, so he's not to bathe
You shouldn't.
the child. I mean, but how do you address things like that? Does this go back to a culture that has been built where there was a time where men were the ones going out where women stayed at home? Is it that there are some people who are just very stuck in that situation? What are your thoughts on that?
So a number of things. Yes, I do believe it is a cultural situation. One, and two, there are. If you're being frank and honest, candid, there are a lot of situations where there would have been men being the main perpetrators of sexual violence and so forth. And these are things that plague the whole concept of fatherhood. Because while there may be a minority of men who would have been guilty of such, people just kind of like paint the entire fatherhood, all men with the same brush. But let me just go back a little, because you touched on something about some fathers that don't really step up to the plate. And a number of these situations, to my mind, stem from their childhood and where these men are at mentally. A lot of these guys don't really understand their responsibility of a parent. And the organization means we actually were looking towards working with these men to get men in a different space to understand and accept their roles and responsibilities. So we're looking towards a full parenting program, trying to really impact men in a way to get them into parenting. I've found also that a lot of men are they're victims of their circumstances, meaning that a lot of broken men are broken children. They would have experienced some significant trauma throughout their childhood.
For
And they would have
example?
taken physical abuse, verbal abuse, emotional abuse. They would have been treated particularly because you're a boy, you're supposed to do this, you're supposed to do that. A lot of these men are broken mentally. That when you get them in our safe space, some of these men just break down in tears. And when they have to relook their childhood experiences and even their adolescent experiences, so they take a lot of this trauma that they would have experienced into their adulthood, and that impacts their ability to be the best parent that they can be. Hence the importance for a support system, hence the importance of dialogue and education, because we all know that parenting does not come with a manual.
It's true.
There's no straightforward way of doing it, and we learn basically from experiences. So if your experience of a child, your experience of the parenting that you had was one of a real negative experience, whether it be cursing and beating and quarreling and not being allowed to express yourself or open your mouth in the house because you got to take a child's place, then automatically that type of behavior and that type of mindset is taken into adulthood, and it plagues relationships. So that is where now we even have some of these mindsets contributing towards the breakup in relationships, because as soon as, in some instances, the female gets pregnant, the men get frightened and they jump ship
They roll
because
out.
they do not know how to deal with that. They would have never been taught. They would have never had a conversation. They don't even know the first thing to do. So the organization means we are working towards getting men in a better space to understand themselves emotionally, to understand themselves based on their background, and
Yeah.
to let them understand also that there is hope and there's a way that you can learn
Yeah.
and develop new type of learning to benefit your children.
Listen, I take all those points, really good points that you have made. But as you said, when men, sometimes some men, when they find out that a woman is now pregnant, they just jump ship. But I'm thinking if that scares you so much, then you should not be having sexual intercourse. You really
I
shouldn't.
totally agree. I totally
Because
agree.
this is a natural expectation that this could happen if that's what you're doing, because it cannot be you. I think that at some point conscience has to kick in. You shouldn't just, that is a major thing. You should not just be leaving somebody to deal with that. And I don't think on the same token you should, as a female, completely exclude a male who wants to be a part of the journey just because you are upset. We have to get more mature in terms of that emotion and what is logical and what is the right thing to do, and make a way to be there in whatever way possible for these children who will one day become
Correct.
adults that we're bringing into the world. Because it is true, people say it, but it is true. They did not ask to be here, and if something happens, they deserve the best chance that they can have at life. So we're going to pause. Fabian, we're going to talk with you again when we bring everybody together. But up next, we are going to hear from Brittany Brathwaite. Stay tuned. All right, we're back with you. And I know that this conversation is going to need more time. It's unfortunate, but we have to do what we have to do today. The show may be a little shorter, of course, because that press conference, we're on standby for that from 11:30. So just take note of that. But right now, I'm going to bring Brittany Brathwaite in. She's a human resources specialist. She's a consultant. And this lady can tell you whatever it is your organization needs. If this is something that you, for example, you're trying to put in place at your organization, this is the lady who can advise on that. And so I want to say good morning, welcome. Thank you so much for taking the time to spend a little time with me here on my 10 to 12.
No problem. Good morning.
Great to have you. So, Brittany, I'm sure you've been hearing the conversation I've been having with Mr. Sargent, and we'll get to that. We'll engage on some of these topics, on some of these points. But first, I want you to, let's discuss the difference between maternity leave and paternity leave, one versus the other.
So just so we start with the basic understanding. Right now, we don't have a legislative right to paternity leave in Barbados.
Right.
Just in preparation for some discussion points for the show, I thought it was good to note that across the world, there are only around 90 countries, this is in the entire world, who actually have paternity legislation. So it isn't one of the scenarios where the region or even Barbados is really lapsing behind, but there's a lot to do. And I think Fabian kind of took us down that rabbit hole very well. There's a lot to do with the formulation of the matriarch or the matriarchal society, particularly in the Caribbean region. We all know our history. We had a history of plantocracy, and that meant that
Yes.
in many cases, you know, uh, males went out, and females did as well, but males went out, they worked in the field for longer hours, and females primarily did the child rearing. And our history is always the fabric of what makes us. And we either need to consciously unmake that, or it's perpetuated. And I think that's one of the things that we're seeing in the Caribbean region, in relation to not legislating it.
Mm-hmm.
And Fabian said it very clearly. Child rearing, particularly in the Caribbean and around the world, is seen as a female thing.
Yeah.
And the baseline around why we don't, in some cases, even have consideration for paternity leave, not even legislation, but for paternity leave, is that baseline understanding.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think, the difference, distinct difference is even in the articulation or the drafting around legislation takes into consideration, of course, more so the bearing of whether the child, and in our legislation, it speaks to you benefiting from maternity leave, even if you do not have a pregnancy that produces a living child.
Mm-hmm.
So that's also a distinctive point. And those are the nuances that we have to look at because, of course, a female will have the physical manifestations and
Yes.
the physical harm done to her body if there is not the production of a living child. But when we start to discuss paternity leave, will the father also be available to have paternity leave in instances where the child is not produced as a living child, where the couple have lost that child? So all the discussion is wide, and I can't wait for us to get into it.
Yes, and it gets really complicated because there are so many different ways now. If you think on if someone has harvested eggs and you're going to go the in vitro fertilization route, a father will need to have some presence. Their time will be needed at points. That too is difficult on the female body. But how do you go about setting it up and getting it done right? Because as you said, we really aren't like behind. This is a situation that's happening across the world. And it's different wherever you look. When I checked the UK, it's different. And again, there are pockets of places and people who've decided to put something in place at their organizations. And to me, that is a step in the direction of saying, I'm taking the man's right as a father and to play his fatherly role seriously and not thinking it's just some kind of escape or another means of getting time. So how do you set it up from an HR perspective? What are the things you have to look for?
There's so many things. I think you have to start from from the inception, and that literally means considering what would trigger a person having the right to take paternity leave. Of course, there's a huge distinction between maternity leave qualification and paternity leave, because a male can, of course, have multiple persons pregnant at the same time.
I wrote it down as a note, Brittany. You got to it first.
So from an organizational standpoint, what would be the baseline qualifier? Is it that you are, going to use the person with whom the person resides? Is it that the person must be a common law spouse or a domestic partner? So when you're formulating your paternity leave policies, determine what is the qualifier. We also have to look at, the proximity or the number of times this leave is available within a person's tenure.
Right.
So under our existing legislation for females, the employer rightfully only has to preserve and extend maternity leave for 3 pregnancies while that person is under their tenure. Now, that's the legislation. Companies have and continue to do better. The question is whether or not in your paternity leave policy, in the absence of legislation, do you mirror what's in the maternity leave legislation? Or, do you say that we're going to do less than that 3 times during the tenure or more, and it's an incentive? So I would say those are the first 2 starting points for consideration. And then we really do a deep dive.
Yeah.
So we have to then consider, varying situations. Are we talking about birth via, or are we talking about uh, creating a human life through in vitro, or are we talking about natural contraception and so on? What are we talking about in the way that we are formulating the life? Are we talking about adoption? May it be feasible that it's not just adoption, but there's a foster care situation which is
Exactly.
manifesting into adoption? And all of those scenarios really have to be contemplated when you are formulating the policy. In some cases, it's already, because it's not really featured to in the maternity leave legislation, some of those nuanced situations. And you have that as a policy baseline for your maternity. You may simply want to mirror it for your paternity.
Yeah.
But then, so beyond that, then it's of course, bring that child into the household, which is a huge, I think Fabian said it best. You don't get a manual for parenting. So, regardless of your process, when you bring a child home for the first time, whether that child is a teenager whom you've adopted or whether it's a baby, there's a time frame for transition. So are we going to vary the time frame dependent on whether there's an adoption proceedings and we're dealing with an adult or teenager, or are we going to vary that time frame for maternity leave dependent on whether it's a baby? So the details, or the devil really is in the details, because the scenarios can become very complex.
Yep.
And the larger your workforce, the more you need to ensure that you really fully ventilate as many of the issues that may come up as possible. Of course, there may be issues that you may never have thought about, but try as best as possible to fully ventilate step by step in the process, what and how the policy will be used and what it looks like.
Okay. Do you feel though, I mean, we know that the conversation really started as far as making it legislation. I think in 2019 there were public engagements, and then 2020 really looking to present what it ought to be as legislation. What are we moving quickly enough, pandemic considered?
I think so. I definitely think so. When I, even looked at the minister's comments, which were made in some cases pre-pandemic, just in around February 2020, and
Yes.
then he made comments even in the middle of the pandemic. He acknowledged that there were pieces of legislation that the Ministry of Labor was still assiduously working on despite all that was happening. As I said, when we look at this in a global context, we really aren't that far behind. When we talk about 91 countries in the world having paternity legislation, we aren't that far behind. Of course, we can always do better, so I'm not saying that. But when we look at the global context, and even when we consider the benefits that we have with maternity leave, a lot of those are not even mirrored in the richest countries in the world. So I think we have a fantastic system, a baseline system. So I think we are through the ministry and the ministry responsible for the legislation. There's adequate attention being paid to the topic. What I personally find to be positive are the number of private sector entities who are saying, even in the absence of legislation, this is what we're going to do.
Yes. Yes.
And I think it's absolutely lovely.
Yeah. What are they doing? I'm hearing things like 2 weeks being presented as an offering for men to have as paternity leave. As an HR specialist, what would your advice be in terms of putting this in place? And I know that there has also been a concern of abuse, but I can't abuse it. I mean, typically women, I don't think, abuse it. But what would you say to help people understand, look, there's a way to do this?
Yeah, well, I think it goes back to ensuring that the qualifiers that you have in place can, in fact, be verified, so that people don't have the ability to abuse it, and you don't have a system where people can apply and have leave approved left, right, and center as a baseline. So even from an organizational standpoint, and you're concerned about abuse, you set the correct framework and you manage that. So I think abuse should be the last thing on our minds, because there's several other policies that already suffer abuse: certified sick leave, casual days, etc. So I don't think abuse should be a reason for deferral of a paternity leave policy. Absolutely not. What I think we should be looking at is the comparisons between what we're seeing. And on average, across the region, we are seeing private sector entities offering between 3 to 5 days as the average. Those who are doing better are going 10 business days, which is relatively good, because when we see the ratio between in Sweden, for example, their maternity leave for their maternity leave is 27 weeks, I think, and their paternity leave is around 20 weeks, which is the best in the
Fantastic.
world, one ranked in the world. But all others, we are finding about half the time is extended to the father, or to the paternal father, as would have been extended to the mother. So the real benchmark here is that you're seeing half of the time being extended in the region. What we're seeing in the absence of legislation is really a 3 to 5 day marker, with the better private sector entities offering 10 days, 10 business days, not including weekends, because weekends obviously would be your time.
Well, what do you say, though, to take, for example, Mr. Sargent's point about what is offered to women being offered to men? Because, and I'll just say, I'm one of those women that had complicated pregnancies, and I have one son. And there are different situations. You could be on bed rest for a long time and you need help. So if I'm just thinking that if you just give 4 days somewhere around when the baby's coming to a man, I mean, he can't really be there for you unless he maybe take some kind of leave, and then people may see that as abusing leave, but they don't understand it. I'm thinking if we just went through Home and Family Month, if we are taking it seriously and we mean what we say about wanting family units to be better, and it has been said and shown that giving men these opportunities to be present and to be part of encourage stronger family units, if this is what we want, isn't it then a fair request to ask for that kind of time for men for paternity leave?
I'd say, there are lots of variables to asking for absolute parity. So there may be, there, as I said, there are medical considerations that are extended in the first instance as to whether or why females are given that length of time. So to go directly for parity, I don't necessarily think it's going to be achieved, just because the medical circumstances for the female may not be what's for the male. But what I do think we definitely need to consider, it's a lot more flexibility around the paternity leave, and versus, so you can customize these type of policies so that the leave assist the person, or the female or the male, who is going through this process with his partner a lot better. So rather than saying the person has to take this leave at a fixed time, is it going to be feasible for this person to take this leave, dependent on, the ups and downs in the pregnancy? Is it Will there be some level of flexibility to the segments of the leave that can be applied? So I'd say absolute parity may not be something that we see, not based on what we're seeing elsewhere, but I do think where we can kind of find a meeting in the middle around that, is even if persons are extended half of the time, um, you know, considering that they're not going through any medical procedures like the female, the meeting of the middle could be around flexibility.
That's
And we
where I
do
wish
know
it could
that.
be shared. We're gonna pause here, Brittany. I really wish they could take some of the pain. We'll pause here and continue in a few moments.
Great.
All right, we're back with you. This is my 10 to 12 on a Wednesday, June 9th, and we hope you're finding the information interesting. And I hope that, if you know a friend, there's a male friend who needs a little encouragement, you will extend that. Let them know that there is assistance and there is support, and that people are pro men being able to properly execute their fatherly roles. So I'm chatting with Brittany Brathwaite now, and we're talking about paternity leave. Brittany says, while we may not be able to expect parity as far as, the same amount of maternity leave as it relates to paternity leave, let's try and see how we can be as flexible as possible and perhaps take what is offered and put it at specific times where that help is needed. That also calls for your human resources department or your organization being understanding and sound flexible and recognizing, if you extend the trust to share what's going on in a family situation, them respecting that there will be times that you need to call on them to be flexible with you. But what should we expect then? If not the same, what would be a reasonable middle ground for you as an HR person?
I mean, where we're seeing people going to the top end around 10 and 15 days, I think is what we will see in the absence of legislation. I've not been privy to the bill or the discussions around the bill, but I think we will probably see maybe a 20-day or at max, and 20 days is a month, yeah, because that would be 5 working days a week. So we can probably approximate, we'd see maybe 20, 25 days. If we get more than that, that would be fantastic.
Yeah.
I don't think we should assume parity, but the nuances I was alluding to before we closed, was around the things that females go through outside of the maternity leave.
Yes.
So a female may, in fact, be placed on certified sick leave as a result of issues coming up from the pregnancy. So that has nothing to do with the actual maternity leave. So I think some of the customizable elements around that would be, can this father take this maternity leave in broken segments versus a fixed period, because the maternity leave is very fixed in the way that the legislation is written.
Right.
So we hope to see something like that, so that the mother actually has that assistance throughout the pregnancy, because I think the intention is to ensure there are two things. There's assistance for the mother, but there's also that bonding time. Yes. And if I have to choose as a father, it feels kind of inconsistent, because I'm leaving my partner either here or there, and I have to choose where I leave that partner.
So allow them the option of some before or at points during, and then some after, so they can at least be there for that first, the welcoming.
Absolutely. And I think Cassandra, you made an excellent point around countries who are, doing paternity leave through a legislative mechanism. I would also say, I don't have the statistical facts to back this up, but we do have to look at the way in which countries like Sweden and Norway and their crime rates and all of these things and their economies are churning, when we look at the way in which their familial entities are allowed to be groomed. So I think this is a much broader discussion, and I love that Fabian took it there from the onset, because outside of the organizational perspective of ensuring that a father has that equal or that parity in raising, there is a wider societal implication that I think is positive and has been positive for the countries who have put these things on the forefront.
Exactly. Okay, so this is good stuff. We want to remind you as well that if you have questions or comments, you can do so via Facebook. You can also call us in the traditional way and engage that way if you have something you want to share or say or ask. 228-5562 or 228-5563. So this is completely possible. Do you also want to say something about, because you alluded to that complicated situation, currently, women can also apply to have assistance through the courts when fathers are not pulling their weight. Now, that situation you mentioned probably happens more often than we know, where two persons are pregnant at once. And if legislation determines that you can only look out for the child that is within a particular setting, a home setting, whatever that is described as, should there also be some opportunity for that other person to apply for parental presence? Because I was reading up as well and I saw that there is a difference between paternity leave and parental and paternity. So it can get really complicated. What are your thoughts?
I like the term parental presence. Nice term, Cassandra.
Thank you.
Because now the intention of legislation is to provide a framework for us. But we cannot absent ourselves of individual responsibility in decision making. So and this would be for us to, or for me to say, not to expect policies or legislation to be created around your individual decisions. And that's just realistic, right?
Right.
Businesses are in business to make money. And if you put yourself in a situation where you, for example, have three babies on the way in the same year, and whether there's parental presence leave or paternity leave, it's not virtually, it's literally impossible for a company to extend that leave and that paid leave to you three times in that given year
Right.
for a scenario that you ought not to be in. Because it isn't like certified sick leave where you may get ill, right? You've made a conscious decision to put yourself in this situation. So whether we will see legislation or organizational policies encapsulating leave for those multiple circumstances of pregnancies, I highly doubt it. I like the provision of parental presence because a company may say, okay, we recognize that this is a scenario you found yourself in. You can take paternity leave for the person who's your domestic partner or your common law spouse,
Right.
but you can probably utilize a casual day or two if the other mother is in the hospital and is giving birth to the child. So there may be some allowances, but will there be policies that take consideration these individual scenarios? I don't think we can expect that.
Here's the other question as we're talking about that. Where many rights, and feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but often you'll see that provisions are made usually for what is a traditional family setup. So people may not be married and they may have children. So can that also be, and would that also be considered and respected, acknowledged? Should that also be part of the policy?
Absolutely. And I think the policies that we're seeing in the private sector are definitely mirroring that.
Yes.
Not just the paternity leave policies, but where they're enhanced maternity leave policies, we're also seeing that. So we're seeing people using the term domestic partnership, or civil partnership. Um, and of course, common law, what the common law relationship looks like under the ambit of the law is different. So we are seeing policies using those specific terms so that even persons who may not live together, but probably have an entire family and live at separate residences can still benefit from the policy.
Yeah.
Yes, I think
Okay.
not just can we expect it, but it's happening.
Okay, great. Brittany, always great having conversation with you, always so thorough. And I
Thank you.
know that there is more here for us to discuss. So don't be surprised if you are back with us on another show very soon. But don't go anywhere just yet. I'm going to bring Anderson Langdon in after the break, and then we're all going to come together and have a chat. Brittany Brathwaite is a human resources specialist, and she's here with us on My 10 to 12. Back with you now, and bringing Anderson Langdon, the Executive Director of the Barbados Family Planning Association, into the conversation. Good morning. Thanks so much for joining me on my 10 to 12.
Hi, good morning. How are you?
Doing well, thank you. And the conversation, I really feel today like we need more time for this, but I want to give you an opportunity as well to share your stance or your organization's stance on something like paternity leave. And I know that you have strong views on it. So first of all, your role
Yes,
with the Barbados Family Planning Association, the mandate of your organization.
sure. The mandate. Our mandate is to empower people with their sexual and reproductive health and rights, making a community where everybody feels empowered to make decisions over their own body. And essentially, we help facilitate that not only by education, but the provision of clinical and other services. We believe all human beings are sexual beings, and that
Yes.
needs to be taken into consideration. Um, yes, and so we do what we have to do to make sure that that right is maintained and encouraged and empowered.
Excellent. So what's your position on paternity leave? The topic is paternity leave, a right to. That's how I feel.
Okay, so this is personal. Um, uh, so I'm a father of an 8-year-old, and I felt like when my wife became pregnant and there was no provision back then, over 8 years ago, 7 to 8 years ago, that I felt like this is something that we need to work on. I felt it personally. So when we were assessing the organization back in 2018, we actually made the change because as an organization, being equal rights, women's rights, women's empowerment organization in our initial creation, I thought it was something that we needed to embrace. Now, there's a perception that it is about men, yes, but it's also about reducing the burden of child care and family care on the woman. And I really feel that we shouldn't really be talking about paternity leave or maternity leave. We should be
Mm-hmm.
making that family leave and medical leave. And it should be a broader perspective that we are discussing it. But given the context of what limitations exist legislatively, I think that paternity even in itself is what can I say? It's we're still compromising when we speak about paternity and maternity leave. I think the legislation needs to be enhanced, that it speaks further. Our position as an organization is that it should be encouraged. I agree with Brittany that having equity as it relates to the time period at this point is unrealistic. I
Mm-hmm.
actually even think 3 months for maternity leave is too short, but that's another conversation.
I like how you
Um,
think. It's true.
yes,
Because I remember
it's
getting
true.
there and feeling like, what? Oh my goodness,
Yeah,
I'm not ready to do this yet. But you have to do what you have to
yes,
do. Mm-hmm.
have to do. I think for us, we at the BFPA, it's a month, and we are actually expecting, as time goes on, um, that will change as well to really enhance what we need. If we're really about equality, and if we're truly, and here what it is, what Brittany and Fabian said is true. If you're really looking at the impact of paternity, it's not just about birth; it's the impact that it will have on the family, burden of
Yes.
care, and the betterment of our society. And Brittany ended very well. If we look at the economic, the social impact of where there's an increase in paternity leave, there is usually better social and active behaviors of children, better lower crime rates, greater economic growth, a lot of different situations. Um, so the results, the statistics speak to themselves where there's a well oiled machine as it relates to family, maternal and paternal leave.
Mm-hmm.
So I really do feel strongly about it. And I feel strongly about it because I feel like because it is something new, that people are not, as with change, that they're not really seeing the big picture as it relates to the impact that this change can have.
Right.
We've talked about how how the workplace might be impacted. But let's think about, if you want the best employees, this can be a tool, even without the legislation, to change your workplace policies so that you can get employees are interested in benefits as well as salary, and this is an opportunity, I think, as well. So along that lines, I think it allows for that greater impact of the social equity across gender norms,
Yes.
that we're looking for, because you're sharing the burden, and you're also, cases are that it also brings greater income, a stabilization of the family, as well as it relates to paternity and maternity leave.
Okay.
If I break into same family leave a lot, is because I obviously believe that it's that I don't think it should be an adjustment of legislation. That might be what we might do at this point, but I think there should be a really hard look of changing the entire legislation as it relates to family leave.
Okay. So that's what you would prefer it to be referred to as,
Yeah,
family leave.
yeah, because it takes in the situation all those nuances as it relates
Yeah.
to the thing, because the definition of family now has changed and it's more far-reaching, and therefore it goes beyond genetic, hereditary, being actual mother and father. It
Correct.
goes to common law. It goes to relates to gender inequality, in terms of LGBT communities. It really is. It really is more far-reaching.
Yeah, and we did speak about situations of fostering, and
Yes.
there is also adoption. And then we didn't mention this, but there are surrogates, and with us having access to different types of services, there are all these things that can define a specific situation. So hopefully the right voices are being heard. But you mentioned that at your organization, the Barbados Family Planning Association, you've got a month in place. Can you
Yes.
break it down for me? Can you tell me a little bit about that? Because the key thing is not just paternity leave, but paid paternity leave.
Differently. In what aspect? And it might be quite easy in my organization, as there are only 2 or 3 males, and I'm one. So
But we have a saying in the building here, things usually happen in threes, and I'm just leaving it at that and treat it as, on the basis of a generally larger organization. Like it would be so unlikely that this happens to everybody at the same time. But anyway, that's a technical thing. Carry on.
yeah. So essentially, it's not built in firstly addressing paternity leave. It's within really looking at the gender imbalances of our policies and bringing them up to aware that both men and women feel like they are being treated equally, as it relates to anything that happens across our policies. I think that's the attempt of what legislation is trying to do. So essentially, it's simple. My wife is pregnant. We're expecting. I indicate that either formally or by a written note from the doctor. And internally we review and we say, well, this is the period of time allotted. When would you like to take it? Similarly with maternity leave, if you want to break it up into two, we can have it just before and just after. But I think in the ideal setting, I think we want to bring it closer to the date of where birth is, and moving on from there. So we really did think of it in that case in terms of a little flexibility. Brittany alluded to really the relationship between the employer and the employee. I think that's important as well. For me, ideally, we're looking at, and this is in my own experience, it's not just BFPA, but in how I see it, I do agree that there should be some limits. I've read legislation, policies other with regards to 3 times a year. So it's not hard and fast because it's still a new situation, even worldwide. But we're very progressive in this organization, and we are encouraging many to be. Since I spoke about it in January of 2019, no, January of 2019, yeah, January of 2019, I've seen several organizations really indicate, there are many who already have policies, but there are many really indicate that they themselves, as being progressive organizations, have already embarked on this position as it relates to paternity leave and family leave.
Okay. All right. So I hear a lot of let's meet in the middle and find something that works and that can work. But I know that you feel strongly too about not necessarily just waiting for the legislation, but that organizations do something, put something in place in any case.
Sure.
You know, and like Brittany alluded to earlier, you may be able to do better than what the legislation will ultimately bring, you know, but until then, we can all try to do a little bit. What are your thoughts about that and more organizations kind of doing that? I know that there are a few in Barbados. I think there's provision with the Sagicor and Flow. I can't think of others right now.
Flow First Caribbean, for sure.
Right. Right. So some steps are being made. What would you want to say in terms of seeing more of that happen?
What I would say is I would like the organizations, and I think small, big, large, it's coming. Get ahead of the game. Sit down. There's Brittany, there are other consultants. Ask a question. You could go on the internet and see what's already out there for existing policies. Yep. And create one that works for your organization. It doesn't have to be like mine. I've stated why my position is 4 to 6 weeks, really. But it could be realistically in what your organization can do. But it's better to have it now so that there's an adjustment. It's more of an adjustment when the legislation passes. You have systems in regard. I think also that small, medium businesses should really get any discussion on what's going on, because let your concerns be known as it relates to your ability to facilitate paternity leave, and therefore make it be realistic. For me, I don't think I've also been consulted on the NIS on my position as it relates. I think that's the next look at it, but I really don't think that's going to be as difficult as it seems. I think the reality is that male and females pay NIS, PAYE, so there are a lot of technically around the same benefits. It's just they put the legislation in place as it relates to that. So that is where I see my concerns, and that is where I see small businesses and businesses in general really taking a fight, get ahead of the game. And this is not going to be first legislation that is going to be attempted to be more gender equitable. So this is going to be one that I think more men and more women and people in family settings will be more willing to accept and more excited about. But this is going to be first of many legislative changes that are going to push for that gender equity that we're all searching for.
Okay, great. It's interesting though, because normally the fight is coming from the other direction, where women are trying to get that equity across the board, you know, in the workforce and that kind of thing. But I think this is something like we've all agreed that can benefit everybody, all parties.
Cassandra,
go ahead.
I'm going to say this. That is why we're going to cry. I don't think
we're going to clash on that.
I think women have been the ones who have been progressively pushing for paternity leave.
That wasn't specifically to paternity leave. No, I am all for it. As I started by saying that was generally, usually women in terms of jobs and things, you're trying to get the same salary if you're doing the same work, you know, trying to get the same respect, trying to get the same opportunities to progress, that kind of thing. So now here we are all together in a fight for something that is good and progressive. So that's where I'm going with that. Yes, we absolutely are, because, and I will give credit to my husband. He's one of those dads that was present from the beginning. And people say, you know, if children grow up in homes where their dads may not be present, they're inclined to be the same and sharing a part of myself. I'm just saying that it doesn't have to be that way. You can at some point decide and make a decision that you're going to be different, reach out to an organization, have a mentor, somebody who can encourage you as a man, about being what that really means. It's not a number. It's not, oh, I'm 21 or oh, I'm 18, so I'm a man. That's not what it is. I think you need to have the right people telling you, you don't have to be what that person was. You have a son or a daughter. This is how you need to be there for them. We're going to take a quick break, and then everybody's coming together. We may have to wrap the show up at 11:30, but we're going to keep talking so that when you see the repeat on Friday, you'll get the full conversation. Stay with us. Back with you now, and so this is where everybody comes together, and we are gonna talk about it. This is conversation, so I want you to feel free to engage each other, and remember, you wherever you're watching from, you have an opportunity to engage as well. We look forward for your comments. We appreciate your comments. We want you to feel free to share those comments, ask any questions that you want to ask, say anything that you would like to see happening, and we appreciate the comments that have already come, so thanks for that. So my guest, just to remind you, today I have the pleasure of having with me Fabian Sargent, President of Men's Empowerment Network Support. We also have Brittany Brathwaite. She's a Human Resources Specialist and Consultant. And we also have Mr. Anderson Langdon. He is Executive Director of the Barbados Family Planning Association. So welcome back, everybody. Now, let's get into the discourse. We've all heard everybody's thoughts. And Mr. Sargent, since you would not have had an opportunity to share for the longest, feel free to make a few comments based on what Brittany has shared from her HR perspective, as well as Mr. Langdon, who was the founding member of the organization that you are currently president of. Feel free to share your thoughts.
Yes, I do think that that organizations should consider the whole concept of paternity leave. And not only, I know business is business, and it boils down to the bottom line and money and profit, but there's also a social responsibility that I do think that businesses should honor. So therefore, I think the whole concept, and businesses do have, whether it be managers, whether it be family members, there are men involved at this level, and I always try to tell individuals, try to personalize it, try to put yourself in that situation where you are a parent, even if you're not, and what you want for yourself and your family, and that would help inform some of your decisions, because we need to have an emotional connection when it comes to things like paternity leave. Anderson has been involved in the trenches. We've been part of this discussion, let's say probably from the inception. So definitely Anderson, me and Anderson, we share similar sentiments.
Yes. Well, what do you say to bosses? And if we're keeping it real, human beings are human beings, and we're not all understanding people. I sometimes, as you try to appeal to people's better judgment, it does not always work. So what do you say to the boss who may feel, well, you should have thought of that before you took this job? Brittany, anybody, and Anderson, anybody?
I'll just say there's research that says that men or fathers are a lot more productive. Okay, so they can even take that into consideration. There's a lot of research out there which speaks to the productivity of men or fathers due to having that paternity leave. Anderson, you can go.
Okay.
Straight research, 91% in a survey in the US of those who were actually had good paternity leave policies had either no effect or profitability and performance. They also indicated that there was 96% indicated that there was a low or negative turnover, employee reduction and retention. That it was better. And 99% of those in that study indicated that there was no effect, was a positive to no effect on employee morale. So the research overwhelmingly shows that it is in the interest of an employee. But again, that's within the context of the ability of the business to really provide that.
Okay, it's getting some freezing there with the internet. The internet is misbehaving a little bit. But I would like you to repeat the latter part of what you said. So the statistics show that about the productivity, the latter part of what you were saying there.
Sorry, right. So it shows that in terms of profitability and performance, 91% of the business in this survey in the US across 5 states show that was a positive to no effect on profitability on performance.
Good.
And there was a 99% positivity to no effect on employee morale. So employee morale went up almost overwhelmingly.
Yeah. That makes sense to me. You know, if somebody's working for a company and they feel that that company cares for them and their family, they're going to go out of their way to make sure that they do the same for that company as well. Your thoughts, Brittany?
I mean, as I said, you know, there's business and of course there's good business, there's ethical business. But we also recognize that having a diverse workforce and incentivizing in the right ways attracts the best talent. So good businesses will do these things to attract the better talent. And we're seeing that particularly in the territories who don't have legislation. If we're just looking at this from a business perspective, this is good for business because one, it not only has a good social output, but it definitely will attract good talent to your organization. And where people see that there is value for their family and for family life balance around the policy structures that you've put in place, you can also bet your bottom dollar that outside of just attracting but good talent, you're probably also going to sustain and maintain good talent. So you're going to see a number of loyal employees, and loyalty is something that is obviously sorely lacking, particularly because the global workforce is so dynamic. So this is one of those things that's good for business.
Okay, Brittany, I'm going to talk with you some more. I don't want anybody to go anywhere, but there is more to come on My 10 to 12 in terms of the live broadcast. We're going to wrap things now as that press conference from the Prime Minister's office is coming your way, but we will continue our conversation and share it all with you on Friday afternoon. So thanks so much for joining me for today's edition of My 10 to 12. Just stay safe.